Valentine's Day is here soon, and so we should think about some lessons that we might learn related to the concepts that we have in our society about romance, about relationships, and about family in particular. When I think about, well, let me ask you, when you think about romance and relationships, marriage, being together with someone that you truly love, what do you think about? What are your hopes? What do you actually hope will happen under such conditions? We have a lot of hopes and ideas tied up in relationships, don't we? The most amazing thing about relationships, unfortunately, is that when we experience them with the minds that we have now and under the conditions that we have now in our lives and in our society and in our world, these relationships are always going to be samsaric, meaning that they are involved in the cycle of death and rebirth. There is no relationship that any of us have within our lives at this point, that is to say ordinary relationship, that is not born of the event of death and rebirth, that is not involved in cyclic death and rebirth. Even our children, we consider the relationship between mother and child or father and child, we consider that to be most sacred. You know, that's right up there with the American flag. You can't talk about that. That's holy stuff. Yet those relationships are samsaric as well. What does that mean? That means that the relationships occur due to the karma between the participating individuals. If a child is born to us, it is born because that is our karma with the child. The events that occur during the course of the child's life with us and ours with the child are karmic in origin, meaning that they are cause and effect relationships that arise interdependently, and they are based on previous cause and effect relationships that we ourselves have participated in. And that's true as well with our marriages, our romances, our love relationships, our friends, all of our relationships. They're all samsaric in origin. No samsaric relationship can ever be perfect. Probably noticed that by now, haven't you? Anybody here ever had a perfect relationship? Don't raise your hand, because then I'll have to be mad at you. And I don't want to do that today. Maybe tomorrow. Nobody's really ever had a perfect relationship, not a samsaric relationship. It cannot be perfect. Why can't it be perfect? It cannot be perfect because of the causes from which it arises. If a relationship that you had were to arise from the cause of the mind of enlightenment, if it were to arise from the seed of Buddhahood, if that were the case, that is to say, if what you were looking at now was a relationship with a Buddha, then that relationship could be perfect. But each of our relationships, our family relationships, our love relationships, arise due to karma, cause and effect. Karma, cause and effect, as it occurs in cyclic existence, is mixed. It is never pure. It is always mixed. What has a beginning has an ending. What goes up must come down. There are many different characteristics associated with karma, but mostly we know that karma is mixed. When these relationships are begun, when the seeds are planted for all future interaction, who plants them is I, and the other participating partner, who is also an I. These are two egos interacting. The seed that they plant cannot be perfect. It cannot be perfect simply because it is egocentric. It does not arise from the mind of enlightenment. The mind of enlightenment is that primordial wisdom nature which is free of all egocentricity, free of any contrivance that could call itself I. So the I that engages in a relationship with another is egocentric. It revolves within cyclic existence. Therefore, the relationship cannot be perfect. It must be a mixed bag of tricks. It will definitely have some good elements in it. And sometimes that can even be a delusion. You know, that can even be a confusing situation, because it can seem as though, well, we have a vision that actually occurs from the time of our birth, at best, till the time that we have right now. And that is the sure vision that we have, the vision in which we can actually remember cause and effect relationships. We can actually remember things that have happened. For most of us, we don't actually begin memory until a few years old. But we do remember certain things that have happened. And it may actually be that we remember a certain relationship that we've had for a good portion of our lives, and that relationship has been very satisfying, very good. It has had a lot of good in it. So much good that perhaps we've forgotten some of the things that happened that weren't so good, because there were things that happened that weren't so good as well. But overall, you can look at the relationship and you can think, it's good, and it's working for the good. The particular delusion that's happening there, most likely, is that while we can remember from a time approximate to our births up until this time, what we do not know and what we cannot remember for sure is that that relationship did not begin at the time of our birth. It began much before that. According to the Buddha's teaching, we have been born many, many times. Those that are close to us now have been close to us many times before. In fact, it is not even possible to be in the same room with or come in contact with someone who has not, in some previous incarnation, been our own kind parent. That's how many times we were born. Just through factoring things out mathematically, each one of you have been related to each other because you are sitting in this room in some intimate and profound way. Yet we can only see one tiny slice of that relationship. We cannot know what is there. We enter into a relationship with good faith, and we don't know what we're opening up. It could be Pandora's box. It could be that although it starts beautifully in the beginning and continues beautifully in its intermediate fashion, at some point the karma that began a long time ago will suddenly raise its ugly head, and what was very beautiful is flipped over and becomes something odious and terrible. Has that ever happened to any of you? I tried to handle this very carefully because I know some of you must be in love or something, you know. And at this point in your life, you don't want to hear this, and you're not going to like me very much. So I try to handle this very carefully, but when I ask questions like, has that ever happened to you, the response that most of you give, like, oh, has it ever? Or, you know, you start laughing, or you get ready to, you know, slice your throat or something like that, indicates to me that you do, in fact, know what I'm talking about. Don't you? It's true that we begin with relationships with a strong sense of good faith and an intention to do well, and an intention for the relationship to bear itself out well, and it seems for a while that it does. We often cannot account for the amazing circumstances that happen during the course of a relationship. How sometimes a perfectly lovely man or woman, or even child, will take a turn for the much worse and turn into some sort of beastly creature, according to our perception. Or that we ourselves might be perfectly wonderful people, and within the context of a certain relationship, turn into an absolute monster. And then look at yourself in the mirror and think, how has this happened to me? We can't understand how that happens. The Buddha teaches us that how things like that happen is due to the imperfection of samsaric relationships, and that we cannot understand them. We are not familiar with all that is present within that relationship. It may be that within the context of a certain relationship, there has been an habitual tendency, a pattern, that began a great long time ago, and that pattern might have had a great deal of cruelty in it. Yes, cruelty. Or even killing. It might have been that relationship may have been an extremely destructive one, and that habit pattern of destruction is catalyzed upon meeting a certain person. Of course, the opposite may be also true. It may be that you may be perfectly moody and odious person to live with, And yet you meet with that one special person and suddenly you're Mr. Nice Guy or Ms. Nice Guy. So it's hard to predict how relationships are going to occur. Of course they will bring us some happiness or we would not engage in them. But of course they will bring us some sadness and some suffering as well. Samsaric relationships have that intrinsic quality in that they are mixed. They're always mixed. We have so many hopes for relationships, though. What are some of the hopes that we have? And how is it that we are so chronically disappointed in relationships, including the ones that shouldn't disappoint us, like relationships with our children, relationships with our friends, relationships with those that we have chosen to be our life mates? How is it that we are chronically disappointed? First of all, we expect things out of relationships that are unrealistic. We do not understand their nature. If we could see all of the karma that came together at a certain time and space grid in order to bring us a certain relationship, if we could see the event as it truly was, a meeting in time and space that will must naturally catalyze certain hidden karmic patterns or seeds or events that have happened sometime in the past. If we could understand the relationship for what it was, perhaps we could be a little wiser, first of all, about some of the choices that we make. And then we could also be a little bit wiser about some of the ways in which we react. In our short-sightedness in relationships, we are instantly disappointed when something doesn't go according to the way we think we're manipulating it to go. And yet if we understood the long-term habitual tendencies of that relationship, we might understand that perhaps, even though it is not pleasant and not comfortable, some small progress has been made. How many times have I seen it in relationships where two people will just lock horns, really be at each other's throat, habitually, constantly. And if one were to look at the long-term karmic cause and effect relationships that have brought them together, you would realize that there is their habit. And that in this lifetime, because they are locking horns, the only thing they can see is they want to be sure that everyone knows, including the other person, that they are right. And they do not want the other person to be right. They want to be right. And they want it to go in exactly the way they think they should go. But if they could see the long-term patterns of the relationship, they might understand that the point in that relationship wouldn't be to be right at all, but the point would be to stop reacting. Perhaps the pattern of reaction and destructive behavior due to that reaction was very strong in these two. Success, then, within the context of that relationship might be understood differently, mightn't it? We might think that the thing to do now is to learn to be less reactive, more stable in our viewing of the relationship, more relaxed, more comfortable within our own determination to do the right thing, to do what was best. Perhaps the meaning of the relationship would take on a different light entirely, where it wouldn't be so important to just get our own way or have what we want, but a long-term goal would be understood. In the same way that a child wants a piece of candy. It just wants the candy. You know how children are. They want the candy right now. Because the child cannot understand that in 45 minutes they're going to have their supper. And the supper is going to have vegetables in it. And the vegetables are going to be good for them. The vegetables will make their bodies healthy and strong. But if they eat the candy, they'll feel tired. They won't feel so well. They won't feel so strong. Their moods will fluctuate. They simply won't feel well. But if they wait and let themselves be stabilized by a good meal, a proper meal, if they could just wait a little, they'd feel much better. Well, we're like that too. We want our candy, don't we? In terms of relationships, that is certainly true. Because like children, we cannot get the big picture. And that's really one of the main faults of cyclic existence. We can't get the big picture. Even now, while we try so hard to meditate and try to practice and be spiritual, we don't get the big picture, do we? We want instant gratification and we want it yesterday. We want what we want. We can't place things into the proper box, proper perspective. And it's because our memory, our sense of what we are is so extremely limited. We can only think that the beginning of our life happened at our birth and that it occurs up until this time. And even within that, we are extremely forgetful. Aren't we? We can't even remember what caused our suffering last week, let alone previous life. So our sense of what relationships should be is distorted. And of course, the result that we can have from relationships is extremely limited. What is it that we want from relationships? There are so many different ideas. There are as many different ideas about what we want from relationships as there are people. People will think that what they really need is they really need someone to be with, in the sense that they feel themselves to be more functional somehow. If they have a partner or if they have other catalyzing factors within their lives, that many people feel as though they're kind of uninspired without a relationship, a special relationship of some kind. And that relationship can take many forms. It can be a husband or wife, romantic relationship. It can be a child who is dependent upon them. Or it can be a strong friend or even parent upon whom they are dependent. But they feel as though they must have a certain kind of relationship in order to catalyze certain things within themselves. Well, I can tell you that relationships will certainly do that. There is no doubt but that relationships will catalyze change within you. Because what happens is that the pattern of karma, which is your mind, the content of your mind stream at this present time, meets with the pattern of karma, that is the content of the other person's mind stream at this present time. And these karmic seeds drawn out vibrationally toward one another because of their similarity and likeness will begin to catalyze one another. And there will be an exchange. But can we live with that exchange? Look back at the relationships that we have had, even the ones that we are virtuously, proudly, and hopefully with great integrity trying to move through. Relationships with our children, relationships with our spouses, relationships with our parents. If we were to step outside of what we thought we should be with those people, wouldn't we notice that what has been catalyzed between ourselves and those people was mixed? It was mixed. Sometimes they brought hatred out in us. Sometimes they brought jealousy. Sometimes they brought our worst violent qualities. Sometimes they caused us to remain ignorant. And that something in that relationship causes us to just space out and move through and spend time that is precious, time that is wasted. I think that's the thing that most commonly happens in relationships. They keep us busy. Isn't that true? Busy. Just busy. Busy doing what? Busy rationalizing that what's happening there is worth something. But if we look at what it is that makes this precious human rebirth actually precious, it may not be so. It may not be so from a different perspective. Now there are other cases in which relationships bring out extremely noble qualities in us. Qualities of sacrifice, qualities of generosity. Perhaps we have a child that is particularly troublesome, and again and again and again, when we are not inclined, we have to be generous. We must bring out a quality within ourselves that we would not ordinarily strive to bring out, because it's too darn much trouble. Or perhaps we have a parent who was not kind to us, or in some way caused us some suffering. Again and again and again, we have to make the effort to try and love them, to try and see what it is that happened to them, to try to understand their point of view. So sometimes relationships can bring out ennobling qualities. It isn't that they're all bad. It isn't that they're all good. The point that I am making is that they are mixed, and seen in a different light, they can be greatly improved on if we could understand the value, if we could understand the importance, and if we could understand how to use different kinds of relationships within our lives. In order to understand how to proceed with this idea, well, actually, before I get into that, let me mention one more thing. We are terribly romantic as a people. I think human beings in general have romance built into them somewhere. Not necessarily hearts and flowers and Valentine's romance, but a certain way of putting things up in some kind of untouchable conceptual realm and then, staging all of our lives accordingly. Making up kind of fluffy ideas and living by them, kind of superstructures that we create with our thoughts. I think we all have that potential. Certainly we do, or we would not have been able to construct our lives and our conceptual relationships as we have to this degree. But particularly, I think, Westerners, and I think particularly at this time, it wasn't always the case that romantic love was the thing to do. That's really only a couple of thousand years old. Did you know that? Before that, people got married because their teeth were good and they wanted to create children whose teeth were good. Or they got married because of money, or they got married because of social structure. Or they got married to appease wars between villages. There was no such thing as romance. Romance, whatever it was that people had with one another, it came later, if it came at all. And if not, there was duty. There was a different kind of response entirely. The romance that we consider to be the cornerstone of our very lives is actually a pretty new and immature idea from the point of view of development of society. If we really want to try to understand the intrinsic value of relationships, my feeling is that we have to really understand the intrinsic value of this precious human rebirth. What is its value? Now, oftentimes as a Buddhist, you'll hear the idea, really again and again and again, that cyclic existence is not where you want to be. That cyclic existence is filled with suffering. Suffering pervades it. It isn't always suffering, but suffering certainly pervades it. We hear that even if we live a perfect life, if there were such a thing, and no one's ever found one yet, but if we did live a perfect life, that life always ends in old age, sickness, and death. That in all of the different realms of cyclic existence, there is some innate suffering in each kind of realm. So we're told that cyclic existence, according to the Buddha, is a structure that is created through karma and by our ego clinging, that we really wish to pacify. We wish to pacify that whole scenario. We wish to pacify that kind of suffering. We literally make prayers and wish to exit samsara. And of course we are taught that the way to exit samsara is to attain liberation, to awaken to our innate primordial wisdom nature, that nature that is our Buddha nature, that nature that is free of contrivance, spontaneously appearing and self-liberating, free of the building blocks that make suffering. That nature is free of those things that create suffering, free of that desire, free of that hatred, free of that ignorance, free of ego clinging that is the mother of all of these. To awaken to that nature is to awaken to bliss. Buddha is called the bliss-gone one. To awaken to that nature, to be free of the contrivance that is ego clinging, is to cross over the ocean of suffering that is samsara, and to awaken upon the other shore, which is the luminosity and innate wakefulness of our own true nature. That is the event that we wish to occur. That is the end of suffering. What makes this human rebirth so precious is that it is the only one of the realms in which one has such a great shot at attaining that liberation. Even though there are, quote, higher rebirths, such as rebirth in a God realm in which one experiences a great deal of joy and pleasure, one's mind is as filled with that joy and pleasure as your mind would be filled now if you were taking a narcotic that caused like a kind of bliss, you see. Under the influence of such a narcotic, you could not take necessary actions to keep yourself in good shape, to keep yourself healthy, to do what you need to do. If you remained in that narcotic, you would remain so until the time of your death, and temporarily would feel in a narcotic way blissful and happy, you see, drunk. But eventually you would experience the suffering of death, the suffering of old age and of sickness. In the God realm, it's the same thing. There is the narcotic of bliss. It constantly fills the mind. It seduces. It dupes us. It makes us drunk. And so therefore we cannot practice. We cannot achieve realization in the God realm. We cannot awaken the mind. We cannot disengage the senses long enough to be able to perceive in the pure way of non-dual reaction that the senses are so fraught with. So here in the human realm we have that capacity, and it occurs in a marvelous way, a miraculous way. The forces of our karma come together in such a way that somehow in this time and space grid our minds take on a certain kind of pattern or a certain kind of structure. There is a certain degree of spaciousness within our minds. It's individual with each and every person, isn't it? Different people have different levels of spaciousness within their mind. But certainly each and every one of you has more spaciousness than, say, an animal. An animal is deeply reactive. All they can do is react. They cannot stop and consider in the same way that we can stop and consider. An example of that would be, for instance, a dog that needed to go outside and use the bathroom, do his doggy business. That dog could not think, well now, what to do. What I really need to do here is to go out and do my doggy business. And of course, I have to convince my owner to open the door for me so that I can do that. Well, the dog will stand by the door, or the dog may bring the leash and talk to the owner. But there is, by whining or doing whatever it is the dog does, or it may enter out its little doggy door and do its little doggy do, or whatever it is that the doggy does. But it doesn't have the same mental process that you and I do. There are many things that you and I consider when we decide we're going to do our human business. It is a very different kind of process. There are many different spacious moments that enter into that process that are not reactive particularly. They are moments of consideration that the dog is not capable of. All of the lower rebirths have that quality of being deeply reactive. Of course, the lowest rebirths are much more so. Their minds are so tight with reaction that there is no space at all. But with us, we have moments of spaciousness. We can consider, what is this? What is that? There is a moment of consideration. There is a moment during which we can choose not to react. A dog cannot do that. A dog can be held back even while it's reacting. It can exert control, but it cannot think not to react. There's a difference. We, on the other hand, can do that. Furthermore, since we have that little bit of spaciousness, we have as well, as a result, the leisure to practice. Even though we are extremely busy people, it is possible to create within our lives and within the structure of our minds the leisure to practice. That is possible. You have to admit that that's possible. Even while you are so extremely busy, and even while you say to me, I don't have the time to meditate. That's not true, because you have the time to do so many non-essential things. So many non-essential things within your life that you have no business doing because in one way they're not good for you. They're not that helpful. They're not that inspiring. They're just not that good. We can create the leisure to practice. Most of all, that leisure occurs within our minds. Yes, there is suffering in the human realm, but not so much that we cannot at least consider an antidote. In the lower rebirths, even to have a moment of release from our suffering, to consider an antidote isn't possible. We have that. We can consider an antidote. Furthermore, not only do we have spaciousness, we have opportunity. We have the opportunity to practice in that there is method. Here in this place, method is taught. Method that has proven itself again and again and again to bring the result of enlightenment. Not only has the Buddha gained the result of enlightenment through the method that he taught, but countless students that the Buddha has taught throughout the time that he appeared on the earth and this present time have actually attained the rainbow body with miraculous signs and fantastical indications of that enlightenment. That has happened time and time again. Each of you has met with the method. Each of you has come to that method. If it were not so, you would not be sitting here. So each of you has actually come to that point where you have the freedom to make a choice. Each of you has met with a teacher. You all have your faculties complete. If you were not capable of practicing, you would not be sitting in this room listening to the teaching. You would not be able to. And so your faculties are complete. It is not to say that within each and every one of those things there are not obstacles. Yes, there are obstacles to your time. There are obstacles to your capacities. There are obstacles to your thinking. There are obstacles to your meeting with the Dharma. There are many, many different things that occur. It's not always possible for you to come to a class. It's not always easy. It's not always simple. It's not always easy for your mind to accept teaching. These are obstacles that you see again and again and again. But you have enough to make this life a precious human rebirth. According to the Buddha's teaching, it is these factors that make this life meaningful. According to the Buddha's teachings, there are many things that you could do during the course of this life, from jumping out of airplanes to making lots of money to having several dozen children if your body held out, to making art or building yourself an empire of one kind, or you can do nothing. You can also do nothing. You can remain impoverished in many different ways and simply do nothing, remain extremely passive within your life experience. You have the freedom to do many different things. But what makes this life precious is what makes this life the vehicle by which suffering might end. Because in all the realms of cyclic existence, wherever you were born, wherever you will be born in every future time, it will always be pervaded by suffering. And therefore, if you have the opportunity to alleviate suffering, to exit from that, to accomplish something that will bring about the cessation of that suffering, that, and really only that, is what makes this life meaningful. So when we take the vows of refuge, that is to say the vows that indicate that we are moving toward the door of liberation, that we will move in a determined way toward the door of liberation, and when we take the bodhisattva vows, which are the vows of compassion, in which we promise to benefit sentient beings, to generate compassion in order to benefit sentient beings by alleviating their suffering equally with our own, it is considered that we have accomplished, and we are accomplishing within this lifetime, the only things that have meaning for humankind. That's a strong statement, isn't it? Harsh when we've engaged in so many activities to hear the Buddha say, those are the only ones that have meaning. But have you thought about it? Have you really thought it through? What is the future? The future is to revolve in cyclic existence, really being the victim of whatever karma ripens due to whatever catalysts you run into, including these precious Valentine relationships. These catalysts are unpredictable, they're unknown. Karma ripening is like a great soup boiling. Sometimes the carrots come to the top, sometimes the potatoes, sometimes the meat, sometimes the spices. One can never tell. Karma is unpredictable. It is so moving and fluid and dynamic. It is unpredictable in any way that we could possibly predict. And so what has meaning now while you're clinging to this rock of Gibraltar, this time and space where you have opportunity, you have spaciousness within your mind, you have method, and you have met with the auspicious event. The only thing that has meaning is to make use of that time. Now, how should we consider relationships within that framework? Relationships can be precious, actually. But we must understand them for what they are. If they are ordinary human relationships, if they are ordinary relationships between two samsaric beings, they are samsaric in nature. They always come to us due to mixed karma. That means that they come together due to negative, unfortunate karma, and they come together due to positive karma as well. So they're mixed. We must realize the nature of these samsaric relationships. And keeping the big picture in our mind, although we may not know the exact picture, we should do our best within each and every one of them. Do our best to help one another, to take advantage of this precious human rebirth. And we can't dupe ourselves about it. It has to be done in the right way. We can't say, well, I'll simply be nice to you, and therefore, that's it. You know, I'll buy you a Valentine's Day present. And that'll be it. Because you know what's really going on there. What's really going on there is I want, you give me, I give you. The manipulation and contrivance that comes with samsaric relationships. Why not solve the problem of samsara with true generosity and help one another to be benefited by this opportunity? According to the Buddhist teaching, the only non-samsaric relationship that one has is the relationship with one's root guru. Because the root guru is actually considered to be the appearance of Lord Buddha's compassionate activity in the world. It is by the means of that root guru that the path is given to us, the method is given to us, the means is given to us, and the door of liberation actually appears in that way. So that relationship alone is considered to be non-samsaric. It does not arise from samsara, therefore it does not result in samsara. But every other relationship in our lives, including those of our children, our friends, everyone, have that samsaric quality. At this point, there are many different choices and decisions that we have to make, really, intelligently, when we hear all these things. First of all, we should choose relationships carefully. They are always catalysts for us, and yet we consistently choose relationships that draw us away from our own spiritual life, don't we? Consistently. Relationships that keep us busy, that complement us, that keep us excited, that keep us romanticized, or whatever it is. Sometimes just keep us supported. And yet these relationships slowly pull us away from the light of spirituality that we can and should take advantage of. But once we have chosen a relationship, once we are involved in a relationship, at that point we have a responsibility. The responsibility, first of all, is to see the relationship for what it is, to understand it. And that means you cannot be blind to it. You must see some of the good characteristics that are in it. Perhaps this relationship is with a friend or a relationship that can engage in some spiritual, beneficial activity with you. Perhaps it has that quality. But perhaps the relationship at the same time is also deluding, and that it doesn't quite keep you on track. It pulls you off. You must understand the mixed nature of relationships. And then the next decision, after you've made the decision to understand relationships, that you must make is to be true to yourself. To hold your spiritual life opportunity priority as your top priority, that nothing can compromise that. You may think that you are being kind to give all of your love to one certain person, or even your family to certain persons, 3 certain persons, 4 certain persons. But if you think about it, the other opportunity that you have besides doing that is to take a vow and to practice accordingly, so that you will consider the welfare of all sentient beings to be as important as the welfare of any sentient being, including yourself. Including yourself. Therefore, the benefit of many has so much more weight. And no matter how much love we feel, no matter how much regard we feel for some other person, no matter how much we deeply understand them and deeply care for them, our compassion, then the arising of that compassion, and the steps that we take to fulfill that compassion for the welfare of all sentient beings, that must come first. It is that compassion, that love, that far outweighs the consideration of any one or of any small number of people. According to the Buddha, the greatest and most generous act that each of us can engage in, and from that point of view, I suppose, the most romantic thing we can do in terms of loving one another, is to liberate our own minds from the jail of samsara, so that we can return again and again and again in order to benefit sentient beings, so that we can bring true benefit, true method, true relief to others. It's a higher road and a greater consideration than the smallness of our little lives. It's a great jump and a very difficult one to get used to, but it's one that must be made. The outcome of clinging to one small relationship as our only hope, what can that be? You know what it'll be, what it has always been. Disappointment, always. Why do we continue that behavior? Because we continue hope for all the wrong reasons. Not understanding relationships, not understanding what has brought them about, what brings them together. We do not understand that relationships by their nature must always remain as they are, because they are samsaric. They will be mixed, always. To depend, to rely upon one relationship for our happiness is a fruitless and stupid search. Any of us that have really tried that know that that's true. It will never happen, no matter how much both parties and how nobly both parties try. True happiness comes about through loving unconditionally and genuinely in an unselfish way. The format that we use for that love is to take the Bodhisattva vow, a vow of kindness and generosity in which we ourselves vow to be of benefit to sentient beings by liberating our own minds and then doing what we can to liberate others from their suffering. Happiness actually comes about through that means. Never disappointment. That's impossible. One cannot be disappointed by engaging in kindness. In closing, there is one special relationship, I think, even within samsara, that can be of benefit. And it's one that I feel a lot of work should be put into. And that is the relationship of family. Family is important, but it is not to be understood. Many people think they are living noble and virtuous lives by putting all of their effort into family, thinking that to make their marriage work is the noble and right thing to do. It's moral, like American apple pie. And putting all of your energy into your kids to be good parents, to let your children do exactly what they want to and talk to them all the time while they're doing it. And to let your children run wild and crazy and be loving to them the whole time. Or even just to constantly, think of your children in some way that you're trying to do the best you can by them. Many people think that is the ultimate noble behavior within our world. I think that idea comes from confusion, and it comes from the confusion of not understanding the preciousness of this human rebirth. I think family is extremely important, even though it is misunderstood, in that family can be a structure by which the idea of compassionate activity can be nurtured. It's a structure almost like a medium in which the creation of that form of life, of that method of living, can be engaged in again and again and again. When children come to us, they do not come to us as blank sheets, as we commonly think. They come to us with karmic patterns, habitual tendencies. Any mother that has half a brain, has had 2 children, knows that those babies were different. No mother can be told that 2 newborn babies are the same. I've never heard the end of nurses saying all the time that when they see babies come out of the mother's womb, those babies are different. They are different. Some are placid, some are angry, some are noisy, some are sweet. They are different individuals. They are different. So our children come to us and they have certain habitual tendencies. If we take the broad view, we realize that right now we have a precious and wonderful opportunity to help them to reinforce and to catalyze, and if nothing else, to begin, in whatever way possible, in whatever way they are capable of, the habit of kindness, of generosity, of living a moral and ethical life. Do you think it's a big deal that you buy your kids lots of clothes? Do you think it's great that you give them wonderful meals? Do you think it's wonderful that you keep the house clean for them? Do you think it's lovely that they all have a color TV, every one of them? Do you think it's lovely that they have roller skates when roller skates are in fashion and skateboards when skateboards are in fashion? That stuff is baloney. It's nothing. It's useless. It is useless. The best thing you can do for your child is to help them develop a strong moral and ethical structure that will be a guide to them during the later years in their life when they are lost, when they have nothing to turn to besides what they have learned. Children without a strong ethical and moral fabric are lost children. Children without a hero to look at that they can see has developed happiness and strength and prosperity through a strong moral and ethical fabric, structure, are unprepared for their lives. Children who have not learned that kindness is happiness, children who think that getting more is happiness, these are lost children, and we have not helped them. Family can be precious in that way. Can't you see that? Family can be the beginning of a new world. Family is where a new world starts. And family starts with 2 people that come together with a commitment to make such a structure. And that should be what we celebrate on a day like Valentine's Day, a day when lovers come together. the greatest love that we can share with one another can be a much more profound, a much deeper romantic ideal. Yeah, it's still a romantic ideal, that's true. Anything in samsara actually is. But it's one upon which we can build some realization, one upon which we can pacify the causes of suffering. When people come together to love one another, when they make something together, it should be this. Based on good choices, taking in account the value of this precious human rebirth, we should join together and make the best of this precious human rebirth. Make choices that are beneficial to one another. Make choices that are beneficial to the children. Now, the monks and nuns may think that they didn't have to listen to this class, but that's not true. You have friends. Some of you have children. Some of you, you all have parents. You have one another. In a sense, you have married the Sangha community. And you have to make choices about that as well. This is a precious human rebirth. And this rebirth can be used to produce the cessation of suffering. Love in the world, the family unit, friendships, community. These are structures in which that idea can be given birth and can be continued. A last thought is this: one of the three precious jewels, which are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, is the Sangha, or the religious community. We actually take refuge in the religious community. That's love. That's family. More than anything else, this community is my family, and I invite each and every one of you, as you join this community, to consider this your family, because it's a family you can depend on. There is nobody in this religious, spiritual family that wants anything for you other than the cessation of suffering. It's a family that comes together with one purpose, and one purpose only: love. Not manipulation, not craziness, not funny romantic ideas, but to support one another through the door of liberation. That's the point of such a family. Do not deprive yourself of that community. Please take advantage of that. And let your own relationships and your own families as well drink from that nectar. Nanda.